Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. Erik Skopil on the show. I'm Matt Prehm. It's the day after Selection Sunday. And Erik, I don't know how many people thought this was going to happen day one of the college basketball season, but you and I are both covering a NCAA tournament team. The women and the men have been selected into the NCAA tournament. Back to, I'll be honest, how it should be. It was the norm that this time of year, you would be covering the women, I'd be covering the men, and we'd see how far they'd go. And the NCAA tournament, both are back. The women were selected as a 10 seed. They will be playing in the Regional 2 in Birmingham. But first, they've got to go to Raleigh, North Carolina to play in the Duke pod. They play the Vanderbilt Commodores first, the Durham pod, not the Raleigh pod. Don't want to upset any Duke or North Carolina fans there. The men, they earn a 5 seed. They will head north to Seattle. They will play 12 seed Liberty. We're going to break down both matchups, both invitations, and obviously they accepted those invites by the men and the women here on the podcast. Let's start with the women first.
Yeah.
They're 2-3 in their last 5 games going into the tournament. They went 1 and done in the Big Ten tournament. They lost their last game in the regular season at Washington. They lost a game on the road at Nebraska in mid-February. That was theirs for the taking. They had all the momentum. They lost it in overtime. You could argue like they probably sweated things out a little bit, and they kind of felt like they got in safely. They're not one of the last 4 teams in. They don't have to play the buy-in. 9-11, 10 seed, and this is a matchup that probably Vanderbilt's going to be favored. Probably they play 10 times, they win more than half, but Oregon's probably capable of winning, and all it takes is just winning 1 time in the tournament.
Yeah, and in terms of the sweat, Matt, I was more worried about first 4 being rather than making the field. They were, to me, clearly going to be in, but just like, were they in that first 4? And I wasn't convinced either way. And obviously they were, I think, the second to last team to avoid playing in that first 4, which is on Wednesday, I believe. So, that was kind of where my head was at. And you're right in terms of kind of running through the back end of the schedule here. They had this great run in January where it looked like, hey, they could be maybe like a 7 seed or something like that. And then they just kind of didn't play very well, fell apart down the stretch of the regular season. We can get into some of that in a second here. But this is going to be a really difficult matchup with Vanderbilt. We were just talking before we ran through this. They've got a real star-studded team of young players. And for Oregon, it's a veteran squad with, both these teams have kind of limited NCAA experience. We'll get into the Deja Kelly of it all in a second, because that's kind of the most compelling case for Oregon. But this is going to be a really tough game to start this. And if they're able to win this game, I think that would be kind of a cherry on top of this season, Matt. I think, and the men are in a very different place where if the men win 1 game and lose the second game, everyone's going to be kind of up in arms probably a little bit, even though that second game's maybe against Arizona, which we'll get to in a second. But on the women's side, I think it's like if they win a game, I think everyone's feeling like, hey, pat yourself on the back.
Absolutely.
That was a great season. Whatever happens in that second round game, most likely against Duke, is whatever happens there. You're not expected to beat that team. Vanderbilt, by the way, is favored by 5.5 points. So you're not expected to win in the opening round. But if you do, I think that ends up being seen as a success. And really, speaking with Kelly Graves on Sunday, shortly after the selection, like I think just getting into the tournament, and some people will poo-poo this because you hear this all the time, don't just be happy to be there. You want to do more. And certainly they would like to win that, there's some games, but I just think for this program to go from losing 14 in a row to close last season to now being in the big dance is for them kind of an accomplishment with it, in and of itself. So starting there, season is already, to your point, Matt, I don't know if early on in the year, many people thought this team would make the tournament. I wasn't really one of those people that was bullish enough to make that claim. I started to believe kind of maybe by December and then really in January that they'd be a tournament team. To get to this point, I think that's a nice step in the right direction. And now, big picture, the next step for Kelly Graves is to kind of figure out, this is a really senior-laden team, what this offseason looks like, try to get to a situation where this is where they're back to every season, which has not been where they have been previously, with a couple of years absent prior to this one.
Yeah, 6 tournament bid in the last 8, tournaments played for the Ducks, first since 2002 for the women, 18th all time for the program, and 6th with Kelly Graves. We should note they've won multiple games in 5 of the last 6 tournaments that they've played in. So history suggests they're going to win a game or two. And then that's something that you just can't take to the bank because it's different seasons, different rosters, different opponents. But
sure,
Kelly Graves has proven that you got to give confidence. You got to give some credit there that his staff will have them at least prepared, and they will at least show up ready to play from a history standpoint. And I'm with you. I think this is going to be a year in which it doesn't really matter the outcome. It should be viewed as a success. They got the program back to a level that they should be at on a consistent basis, and that's playing in the tournament. Obviously, you'd want a better seed. Obviously, you want to be in a position to be playing on the West Coast. Obviously, you want to be in a position where you're one of the favorites going into the tournament. And those are all things that should be strived for moving forward. But you're right. 14 straight losses to the end of the year last season. The roster was completely gutted. It was dark, and you have to tip the cap to Kelly Graves and his staff because they turned it around. They kept the players that were interested in staying here. They got them to be better. They got them to be healthy. They added pieces to the mix, and that's I think a big sign of where the program is at, because they sold good players the idea that you could still come to Oregon, you could still get to the tournament, and it still played out that way. And now on the trail this spring when they hit the transfer portal, and we'll talk about that down the road when that time comes, and I'm sure you'll have a great insight into where they're looking, but that opportunity to hit the portal will be a lot easier this offseason than it was a year ago when they lost 14 straight, to attract more players, more talented players, because the program's going in the right direction now. And basketball is a sport where it's weird. Like, no doubt they lose. I don't know the day that they play. Is it Thursday or Friday or Saturday?
They play Friday about 5 hours before the men.
Okay. So they lose Friday, middle of the day in the afternoon. Like, yeah, be upset, be disappointed, be bummed that they lost, but don't lose the picture. The bigger picture is that this team's back to playing tournament basketball and how far they had to come to get there. But so that's my stance on just the overall arching thing. And now let's talk about this actual game, because they're very similar teams. Oregon and Vanderbilt both finished in the middle of the conference. Vanderbilt in the SEC, Oregon in the Big Ten. Oregon played 2 more conference games than Vanderbilt did. They have a winning record. Vanderbilt went 10-8, and Vanderbilt went 8-8. To me, these teams on paper, they look very similar. I've not seen a single minute of Vanderbilt basketball. I've seen a lot of Oregon. My first wonder is, how do they match up with Filipina Che? That's going to be I think the wild card factor for Oregon going into this tournament. And any matchup that they have is they've got a player that, just from a physical standpoint, it's almost impossible for anyone out there outside of probably 5 schools to replicate in practice and to truly prepare for. But on the flip side, you mentioned it, they've got some talented young players, including a freshman who's dropped 50 points. That was a shocker to me, not only once, but twice. The chess moves here are going to be really interesting. Guards against big post players that Oregon has, and the defense that Oregon likes to play this season should match up well with Vanderbilt.
Yeah, stylistically, this is interesting. I was just looking at it. Vanderbilt's the number 7 scoring offense in women's college basketball. They're scoring about 84 points per game. Oregon is 112th. They're scoring about 68 points per game. And if you watch this Oregon team or followed it at all, and if you haven't, this is the time of year, I guess, everybody just kind of naturally sort of progresses and turns and goes, hey, let's check out these basketball teams because they're in the big dance and this is a fun thing to follow. So welcome if you're in that group. But this Oregon team is not a good offensive team. Its success in January was almost solely because of its defense. They won a couple of games where they held teams in the 40s and they were scoring, in the low 50s. That was kind of what this team's MO was when it was playing its best basketball. And so to me, it's kind of a wrestling match of like Vanderbilt clearly wants to get into a track meet in Oregon. And it sounds weird because this is not what Kelly Graves basketball's ever been. They want to like muddy it down and kind of ugly it a little bit. And to your point, Matt, maybe slow the clock down and get it into their 6'8" center. Vanderbilt's basically only playing an 8-player rotation, and their tallest player in that rotation 6'2". So Oregon, this is a matchup. Oregon has that size advantage. Can they take advantage of it? Is Chase somebody who you can rely on? I mean, we saw what she could do at senior day a couple weeks ago. She went for 20 points and 25 rebounds. The issue is she followed that up with 2 games where she combined for like 5 points and 9 rebounds. So, this is a player who's a little bit inconsistent. And if they can get, maximum Filipina Che, doesn't have to be 20 and 25, but if it's 18 and 10 or 15 and 12, that might be the kind of effort that changes this game a little bit. But really defensively, it has to kind of equal back to where it was before. I wrote a story, I think last week after they lost to Indiana in the Big Ten championship or Big Ten tournament, because I thought that was kind of a really important kind of note there of when they'd played Indiana in January, they held them to 47 points, I believe. And this last time, Indiana scored, I think, 74 points. Like, it was a 30-plus point difference. And that kind of got me wondering, and I ended up looking into it. And, Oregon in January, defensively, I've got some stats here. Opposing teams average about 55 points per game. Well, over the last 9 games of the regular season, that number changed, went up to 71. And I think the big one, and this kind of ties into some of what Vanderbilt does, is Oregon from 3 opposing teams during that hot stretch or that winning stretch, 30% from 3-point range. In the stretch after, 45%, a 15% change, a difference of, significant number of points scored per game from the 3-point line. So that to me is in my mind here of some of this is just good fortune if another team has open threes and they make them or don't make them. But a team like Vanderbilt that shoots a really high number of threes and makes them at a pretty decent clip, about over 35% per game, that's going to be an interesting challenge. And really the 2 players you need to know for Vanderbilt going into this, Michaela Blakes, Camille Pierre. Blakes averages 23 points per game. Matt noted it a second ago. Twice this year, she scored 50 or more in a game.
That's wild.
She's a freshman. So this is a really high-end player that could absolutely erupt for 37 points on Friday, and the game's just pretty much over. And then they have Pierre, who averages 21 and 10, a sophomore, a player that I know Oregon was involved with during the.
Oh, good. She's from Arizona. How did she get out of the Pac-12 footprint, which was, I guess, formerly the Pac-12 footprint?
Yeah, right. Well, she was a pretty good recruit that had a lot of regional interest. Big get for Vanderbilt, obviously, and I do wonder, like, if they can keep these 2 players together, they're going to continue to be very competitive in the SEC. But yeah, Pierre, 21, about 20.5 points, 9.7 rebounds per game. Those are their core 2 players, and Blake is a guard. Pierre is their pseudo center, power forward at 6'2". They really lean on those 2 players for offense. They average over 50% of their points on the season per game. So, that to me is kind of what this comes down to is Oregon defensively, are they able to defend the 3-point line well? Can they kind of slow these 2 players? And then offensively, yes, it's Che. And then I think the third player, the next player that really is important is Deja Kelly, who is the only player on this team who's really got NCAA tournament experience. She's been playing pretty well down the stretch of the season. Didn't play well in Indianapolis, but has had some really nice moments. And there's a story over on duckterritory.com. I wrote about it yesterday. She's heading back to Durham, North Carolina, which you go back to Durham. Well, she played at North Carolina her first 4 years of college basketball. She knows that school, that arena, that rivalry well. And she kind of joked that she thought this might be where it was headed. This kind of was, from a storyline perspective, maybe an interesting angle for the NCAA. And, she's playing 10 minutes from where she played her college ball for 4 years down in Chapel Hill. So I know she mentioned she was really excited about this, but I think for Oregon to have success, they really need her to step up and score the ball I don't think they win this game unless she scores 20 to 25 points.
Thing that really stood out to me too about Blake's and Pierre in particular, but then you just go down the list of the players that they have in their season stats is the number of steals that they generate. Blake's averages over 2, Pierre averages over 3. the team themselves as a whole averages over 12. And I'm not looking at the national averages, but I have to imagine 12 steals a game is probably going to be in the higher tier of women's college basketball, if not the top 10.
I looked it up. It's 9th nationally.
Yeah, that does not surprise me. So this team, looking at the box scores and just the numbers and the data that we can get, they find ways to get hands on balls, and they find ways to create deflections, and that can create the game to go at a faster pace. And you talked about, that's not Oregon. That's not the way Oregon this season likes to play. That's going to be a factor, and the turnovers, and obviously Mevius isn't going to be playing in this game for Oregon, and she's one of, if not your best on ball defender, and how's she going to guard their talented wings and guards on the perimeter, or how's Oregon going to guard without her? But then she's also helped with ball handling, and that's probably going to have to lay on Deja Kelly, and she had career highs in this season in statistical areas of her game. But you're right, like the experience that she's had, this is going to be a game why she was brought to Oregon, to provide that foundation of experience in the highest of pressure situations when you're playing against an opponent that's shown that they can create a bunch of steals.
Yeah. Last thing before we move to the men is I just wanted to, you're right on Mevius. I think that injury, which was significant at the time, it's one of their 3 or 4 best players. But in this particular matchup, Matt, where you got to find an answer for Michaela Blakes, you just figure that probably would have been the matchup based upon the size and her ability to defend. And then you go to the other side, and great job pointing out the steals, the turnovers they force. Mevius is one of their premier, ball handlers and initiators of offense, and her absence on that side is also going to be significant. And this is a team that does not typically struggle with turnovers because they have Kelly, they have Peyton Scott, they've got Fiso, they've got some, and Nani Falateas brought the ball up a little bit. They've got options there, but they have had difficulty, I'd say, when the other team has an athleticism advantage and can really, really get out and into them, if that makes sense, and really challenges them. I think of that Ohio State game, and the reason I thought of it is Ohio State is 10th in the country in steals, and that's right behind Vanderbilt. And when Oregon played them in the second quarter of that game, it was a really lopsided quarter. I want to say it was like 25-9, Ohio State's favor. Oregon turned it over and over again, just could not protect the basketball. And that was a similar brand that Ohio State was just kind of coming at them. So we'll see. Protect the basketball. Absolutely an important one for them on Friday at 2:30 on ESPN News is the viewing opportunity.
Well, I'm happy it's a midday game and not a night game. To gives the Oregon fan base something to look forward to during the middle of the day. Because as the men, they're the last game played of the first round. 7:10 expected tip. Let's shift focus here now to the men's side. They go into the tournament with different expectations. First round knockout would be pretty disappointing for Oregon. And I've already seen, it's not overwhelmingly, but I've already seen a couple national media members say like, hey, this Liberty team's, poised to pull a potential upset. Oregon's in a position where they could be upset. And it's a unique deal. Like Oregon's under Dana Altman. This is their 9th tournament where they'll actually play the dance. They're 8-0 in their first games under Altman. They've never lost the day one game. But Oregon has also never really been in this kind of position. They've always been either the team that pulls off the upset, air quote upset, or they are a really high seed, a 1 seed or a 3 seed, and the first round game it's not even going to be close because of just the sheer difference in talent. This is different. Oregon, this is the first time in a while Oregon's been in this position. They're favored by 5.5, but you look at Liberty and just kind of like what the women are going to face, they're playing a very prolific offensive team in the Liberty Flames. They are 6th in the country in 3-point shooting percentage as a team at 39%. They've got a handful of guys that can hit 3-pointers. They don't have a ton of size, and that's probably going to be the matchup that Oregon's going to be looking at in terms of exploiting. But their guards, they're small. Their two starting point guards are under 6 feet tall. Their leading scorer comes off the bench, but they've got 6 guys that average 8 or more points. They've got 3 guys that are going to be playing that average over 10. A 4th guy averages 9. They've got multiple guys 3 guys that shoot, or I should say 4 guys, that shoot 39% or better from 3-point range. This is going to be a team that it's a classic tournament team. That's a low seed that they get hot. They are going to be extremely difficult to stop. It's going to be extremely frustrating to watch because they'll probably be knocking down crazy 3-pointers that you just think, why are they making that? That's ridiculous. But we see it every year in the tournament. I saw it firsthand last year with the guy who's now an accountant, Goki for Oakland. Just absolutely obliterate Kentucky with shots that had no business going in, but he just got hot and he was an elite shooter. And this is that type of a team. So how Oregon matches up with Liberty defensively, this is where it will come down to. Oregon has the better athletes. They have the better coaching staff. They have the better depth. But the greatest thing about this tournament is if you get hot, that can equalize so many of your weaknesses. And Oregon's going to have to play well because they're playing an opponent that, granted, they've not played a single quad 1 opponent this season. They have 0 games against quad 1 opponents.
It's baffling, by the way.
Yes, that's absolutely crazy. So that tells you they only get in because they won their conference tournament. But we're gonna see. Like, is there truly a difference in talent, or is this Liberty team going to play above their weight, and will Oregon play down, and that open the door for an exciting finish? We'll see.
And I guess one thing I'd say is the 3-point shooting in basketball in general is crazy at this point. It's changed even since we were growing up. In terms of like. I think basically almost everybody in every team can hit the 3 at a decent percentage if they were given the opportunities. And you look and see in the NBA, like I just watched an NBA game last week where the Celtics were like 15 of 35 in the first half, and then they shot 5 of 29 in the second half. This is just basketball. I mentioned the stat with the women where like, hey, the other team makes 30% of their threes for a month, and then they make 45%. And 1 month they win 6 of 7, and then they go 3 of 6 because the other team gets hot. This is the reality of this sport where if a team just gets hot, like Oregon was on the right side of this with, I just think of Mr. March, Tyler Dorsey, in that Final Four run. He'd been kind of like a sub 40% 3-point shooter all season, and they shot like 50% for 10 games that were the most important games of the season. And he's a legend, and Oregon almost makes, it has a chance to win a national championship that year, right? That's kind of how this stuff comes together. And so if you're Oregon and if Liberty gets hot and hits a bunch of shots, that's going to be difficult. I think the counter is like what Oregon has been able to be offensively has been kind of almost inconsistent, but like consistently, like I just think that you're going to be able to have a certain number of players that you can rely on offensively. And if the other team is purely relying on a 3-point shot, if that's a 30% shooting day, they're not going to be very competitive if Oregon plays even like a B+ offensive game. So that's kind of my sense of, if the other team gets really hot, you tip the cap. But if you played good defense and they don't shoot at a high percentage, I think you feel pretty good in this one.
Yeah, this is a matchup where they have very few options that have the physical size to match up with a Biddle, with a Kwame Evans, a Supreme Cook, a Brandon Angel. A lot of their players are in that 5'11" to 6'6", 6'7" range. Owen Aquino is their starting center. He's 6'8", 230. Zach Cleveland is their starting power forward, who's probably their best player. He's 6'7", 220. Like Oregon is going to have, like Biddle will have a 4-inch, 5-inch advantage on both those guys. And then that's just standing there. And then you factor in his arms, like, and the reach that Biddle has. Sound like Jay Billis here for a second, but how they alter his shots, I don't know. Like Oregon's possessions should be every single trip down, posting Nate Biddle up on the block, and Dana Altman jokes about how Nate Biddle loves calling himself lately Magic Nate because of his
passing.
Yes. But this might be because he's hit 6 assists twice in the last 4 games, career highs. He might get more than that if it plays out the way it should, where Oregon gets the ball down low to him. They're going to double team him instantly. You know that. And if he can get the ball out quick, and that's where the rotations matter, the ball movement matters. And if Oregon can hit their shots, and they've got shooters, Brandon Angel showed it against Indiana, the corner 3, and Bartholomew and Shellstead have been really good this season. Mm-hmm. If one or two of those guys are knocking down jumpers on a consistent basis, it's going to force Liberty to do something different or play a different way, because if they can't, Oregon could blow them out from a physical standpoint. Angel is a very aggressive, very physical, low post guy. I think he's another one that could do a lot of damage. Supreme Cook is another one that they just don't have the size to deal with the physicality that Oregon's big men play with. But, how Oregon responds on the other end. Liberty's a top 20 team in assists per game too. So that tells you their ball movement's good. Their 3-point shooting's good. They're going to whip the ball around. But this is a classic game where Oregon needs to kind of impose their will, impose their style of play. And if you do that, to me, it'll be a lot like that Wisconsin game a couple years ago where Oregon played them in the first round, and it was close for the first 25 minutes, 30 minutes of the game. And then, Wisconsin got into foul trouble, and they got tired. The game wore down. The next thing you know, Oregon's up by 20 with two minutes to go in the game. That's what this game probably should be like for Oregon. Impose your will down low. Biddle will be the best player on the floor. Shellstead will probably be the second best player on the floor, and you could probably argue that TJ Bamba will be the third. And his defense will be also important. It's just to see how well he can stick to a player, and how well does Liberty adapt to the physicality, athleticism that Oregon has.
We didn't spend much time on the women's side talking theoreticals or hypotheticals of a second round matchup, because I think we both agreed Oregon has a chance to win its first game, but most likely it's a coin flip there, and then it's Duke, and we know what the outcome would more than likely be there. On the men's side, it's really interesting because if they do get by Liberty, and I think unless you had more on the Liberty matchup you wanted to hit, I think we can turn to this. It's a unique deal where this would be the first time in a postseason setting we've got an Oregon former Pac-12 matchup. Yeah, this is. I liked keeping all these West Coast basketball teams together. And it was a very strange year where Oregon didn't really play outside of the Big Ten members, these former schools. Getting Oregon, Arizona was such a big part of the last 20 plus years of West Coast basketball. It was one of the big rivalries, especially with, you think, Dana Altman, Sean Miller. The fact that that's just sitting there in Seattle, that could be something really cool on Sunday, I assume, night, if we get that matchup and both teams take advantage or win their opening round games.
Yeah, that game, if they should both get there, guaranteed it's going to be the 7:10 tip-off Pacific time on Sunday night. That's the perfect Sunday night West Coast window that the broadcast partners will want.
Yeah.
Because, look, Oregon's fan base should be heavily present in Seattle. I'm not going to sit here and say that they're going to have half the arena. That'd be ludicrous to expect. But they should have a good crowd. Arizona will also bring a really big crowd. And that Sunday night matchup, if they play each other, will be electric and will be fascinating to see play out. And that environment in the Climate Pledge Arena will be awesome because you've got two fan bases that hate each other. Arizona, and they ran the Pac-12 for so long. Their fan base always took over Las Vegas for the Pac-12 tournament. They have that reputation, good and bad. And Oregon's fan base, whether it's football or basketball or baseball or whatever sport you want to talk about, they're always kind of viewed in a negative light by the rest of the West Coast schools as well. So that environment would be absolutely fascinating to watch. We also get a matchup like if they beat each other, Caleb Love, one of the most prolific scorers in college basketball, against TJ Bamba, like that will be fun to watch. How Arizona handles Nate Biddle down low without Omar Ballo this season. They've obviously got Vassar and Owake. Those two guys will challenge Oregon down low. But how does Oregon match up there? And then you've got the Jackson Shellstead, whether it's Bradley or Lewis, whoever they want to throw at him there on the Arizona side. And then there's like the revenge factor too of last year, like Oregon knocking them out of the Pac-12 tournament. In a game in which was really surprising. Tommy Lloyd going back to Seattle, spent so many years coaching in the state of Washington at Gonzaga as an assistant coach. Excuse me. But we should also note, like, Oregon is I won't say a super trendy pick to get upset in round one. Arizona is also like the same boat. There's multiple people out there saying, watch out for Akron. Now, I don't see how, because I don't know if you saw my tweet or not, or looked at the rosters at all, but Akron is a fascinating team as a 13 seed. They dominated the MAC. They've won like 28 games this season. They played 9 guys or 10 guys, I think, and 7 of them, get this, Eric, 7 of them are 5'11" to 6'3". They have like no big guys. They have 3 guys that they play that are 6'6" to like 6'8". It's absolutely fascinating. It blows my mind. Everybody else is 5'11" to 6'3". They are either going to get completely run out of the gym by Arizona's size because they have none of it, or they're going to be hitting shots left and right, and Arizona's going to be in this weird place where it's like, do we go to a 4-guard lineup because we can't keep up with their speed, or do we stick with it? But they're hitting threes all over the place. I don't know. Like that game, a lot of people are I shouldn't say a lot, but multiple national outlets have already kind of come out and said like, hey, don't watch this game. Akron's really tough. John Gross always pulls off upsets. So both teams getting to that matchup in the second round needs to happen before we salivate over it too much, because the Seattle Pod's actually a low-key good matchups all the way around. Maryland's coming out. Memphis is coming out. So it's going to be an exciting weekend of basketball. The matchups for Oregon is going to be fun. And hopefully we get some good games. And look, I think the door is there. The path is there for a Sweet 16 run. And the path is there for an early exit too. It's just going to depend upon where this team is at mentally, where this team is at from a consistent standpoint. Are they hitting their shots? If they're hitting their shots and they're playing good defense, I like Oregon leaving with 2 wins and getting to Newark, New Jersey, to play in the Sweet 16. But if they play lackadaisical defense, or they deal with foul problems, or they go ice cold shooting, it's probably going to be a quick trip.
And if they are able to get to this opening weekend, they might get to see a little Cooper flag action.
Yeah, I mean, think of the teams, the talent that Oregon will. If that happens, Oregon will probably play the first 3 draft picks in the NBA draft later.
Yeah.
Cooper Flag at number 1, and then Dylan Harper, excuse me, and Ace Bailey, of Rutgers. And who knows? I mean, there might be a couple other first round picks that they have played, in past teams as well. So yeah, like Cooper Flag experience would be fun. I'm pretty bummed they were in the East bracket. That's like the one I was kind of like, don't get put in there, because if they did advance, it's gonna be real difficult to go cover those next games. But hey, we're getting ahead of ourselves. They got to win the first game.
Yeah.
Got to win the second game to even get a Cooper Flag matchup. But unlike the women, real quick, Eric, I just wanted to talk on this real quick.
Yeah.
Unlike the women, like this is a deal where they got to win 1. And honestly, like if they get blown out in game 2, that could leave a pretty sour taste in your mouth. But this is Yet another opportunity for Oregon to make a run in the tournament. And I think it's just kind of similar to the women, though, of things are kind of falling back in place. They had a 2-year stint where just injuries were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get to the tournament 2 years in a row. They snuck in last year. They won a game. They can win it again, another game this season. That's 2 years in a row they've done it. I think the Oregon program is getting back to a healthier standpoint on the men's side too. And you've got an opportunity where obviously you want to finish this year great. You want to go as far as you possibly can. You want to have a great run, but the long-term outlook of this program continues to trend up just like the women. And that's what we talked about at the beginning of the year for both schools is for the men, get back to the tournament, get a higher seed so you don't have to have as difficult of a path. They've done that. They had a winning record in league play. They won 24 games before the tournament. The women got into the tournament. They're back. They're trending up. Both programs now continue to trend up and have rosters that, college basketball, we know it's always changing.
Yeah.
But both programs should have some confidence that, hey, like you should have some kind of core back next season from a tournament team. And that should give both programs a lot of excitement this season and down the road as well, which is what we wanted to see this season.
And I hope it quiets some of the fire the head coaches conversations, but I know that those will just pop back up next January when the teams aren't playing very well. But no, and just to close, it's been really fun, I think, for both of us to cover these teams this year. I think these are good stories. And if you are listening, if you're this far in the podcast, you probably haven't ignored their seasons. I imagine you're listening because you're eagerly awaiting and you're a fan of these teams. But if you somehow aren't and you're still listening and you're just a listener to our podcast, maybe because of football, check out these games on Friday. I think, they could both lose, they could both win, but regardless, I think these are fun teams to watch and support. And again, if you're an Oregon sports fan, it's worth your time on Friday afternoon and evening to check and see how these teams do. Because I think both teams have had, again, really impressive turnaround seasons from where things have been in the past. And I think the trajectories feel good for both. And now it's a matter of this week going in the right direction. And then obviously this offseason putting together a roster that can be competitive for future seasons.
It's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back later this week with more content. Who knows? Maybe we have some stuff to preview for a Sunday matchup. Mm-hmm. We'll see. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.